The house smelled like nutmeg and roasted turkey when I heard my name through a half-closed door. The hallway was dim, just the glow from the dining room spilling across the runner, catching the edge of my shoes. My mother's laugh carried first soft and pleased, then my father's voice low, certain saying, "She won't know at first." Something in my chest went still, like a glass set down too hard on a wooden table. I hadn't meant to stop near his office. I was only looking for the bathroom. But with my hand on the doorframe and the Christmas tree blinking in the corner behind me, I listened. After New Year's, Amanda calls with the emergency, my father said. They move in temporarily, and nature takes its course. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever been treated like you didn't matter, hit the like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. To understand how that hallway changed everything, you need to know where I came from. I grew up 16 miles outside Boston, where porch lights glow amber against winter sidewalks and neighbors shovel each other's driveways without asking. Our split level had 4 bedrooms, a cornflower blue door, and a maple tree that dropped leaves like golden coins right before Halloween. My parents kept a jar of change by the telephone for pizza nights, and the fridge was dotted with magnets from every roadside attraction my father ever pulled over for. On the bookshelf, family photo albums lined up like a verdict, page after page, where my younger sister stood in the middle of every frame. I was the child who learned to fix things quietly. I patched the drywall after a roughhousing dent balanced my checking account at 17 and set 2 alarms because I refused to be late. By college, I took buses at dawn, double majored in computer science and discipline, and ate enough ramen to memorize the sodium content by heart. My first apartment had 3 roommates and 1 good frying pan. My first salary was a number I wore like a promise. 10 years later, I signed papers on a 2-bedroom condo in a historic Boston building where the lobby smelled faintly of lemon oil and old stone. The living room had tall windows that held the afternoon like a warm bowl. I put a velvet couch there the color of wet soil after rain, and hung small canvases from local artists whose names I never forgot. My parents called it a lot of space for one person. They said it kindly, the way you might comment on a dress that looks expensive on someone who doesn't go out. After Lily was born and James lost his job, the calls changed. Could you co-sign the car, my father asked. Hospital bills are rough, my mother added, her voice lined with hope. Every request wore the soft sweater of family. I rarely said no, and when I did, the silence on the other end felt like winter. Still, I came home for Christmas with a pecan pie and a trunk full of wrapped gifts. The house looked the way it always did on December 25th, garlands pinned to the stair rail, stockings hung in perfect order. My mother's porcelain village lit up on the mantle like a town that never had a power outage. Zoe and Sophie wrapped themselves around my legs. Lily pressed her warm cheek to my collarbone and smelled like talc and milk. Amanda's sweater had a smear of baby food on the cuff. She brushed it off like it belonged there. We set the table with the good plates, the ones with the hairline crack at 8 o'clock, and my father raised his glass as if he'd built a perfect life from habit and holiday schedules. If you had been there, you would have thought we loved each other the way people in Christmas commercials do. You would have seen my mother ask about my condo with practiced curiosity. Do you still have that big storage closet? And the guest room, is it an office now? As if she were buying time between stirring the gravy and mashing potatoes. You would have watched my father cut the turkey with deliberate strokes, the knife flashing like a metronome in his hand. You would have seen me smile because smiling keeps everything upright. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself with the napkin still folded in my fingers. The hallway was cooler, quieter, the sound of clinking silverware softening behind me. My father's office door sat ajar, the desk lamp throwing a triangle of amber light onto the carpet. Possession is 9/10 of the law, my mother said. And I heard Amanda exhale as if the hard part were over. James's voice followed thin and certain. She can get another place. Closer to work. The words landed like sleet against a window. In my mind, I saw my front door opening to boxes. I didn't pack toys in baskets. I didn't buy the Wi-Fi renamed something cheerful and not mine. I didn't bump the door. I didn't gasp. I just stepped into the bathroom and turned on the faucet, watching the water run over my hands until the sting in my eyes stopped threatening to spill. At the table, the cranberry sauce glowed ruby in crystal bowls, and the marshmallows on the sweet potatoes blistered just a bit at the corners. I sat down and asked Zoe about her science project. I tasted the turkey and said it was perfect. I laughed once briefly at a joke I didn't hear. The performance felt like carrying a glass across a crowded room and willing it not to shatter. There is a particular ache that comes when you realize you are not a daughter in a moment that requires one. You are an asset pre-approved. My mother poured gravy with a steady hand, and my father refilled James's glass. And Amanda wiped chocolate from Lily's lip with a thumb that had once hooked onto my sleeve when she was little. The three of them talked about January as if the calendar were a moving truck already idling in my driveway. After dessert, we opened gifts the way we always did, clockwise from the tree. My mother had bought me a scarf the color of winter sky, and my father gave me a book on Boston architecture with a ribbon that left dents in the cover. I kissed them both on the cheek because habit is a language the body remembers longer than it should. We posed for a photo. My smile looked steady. In the frame, you cannot hear a plan breathing behind a door. Outside, the cold had no edge, just a steady press along my coat. The porch light threw a soft circle of gold onto the driveway, and somewhere a neighbor's radio was playing the kind of carol that makes even bad memories sound like they're made of glass. I set the pie dish on the passenger seat and watched my breath fog the windshield before the heater woke up. As I drove through streets strung with lights, the houses blurred like they were underwater. Twice I pulled over palms on the steering wheel, the quiet tapping of the engine like a small apology. When I reached my building, the lobby's lemon oil felt too clean. The elevator hummed with that hotel hush, and the hall carpet bounced slightly under my steps. Inside my door, I didn't turn on all the lights. The living room knew me by now, the broad couch, the knit throw flung exactly where my knees would find it, the side table with a water ring I'd been meaning to sand out in spring. I took off my boots and lined them straight. Then I walked the condo end to end, like I was counting a pulse. In the office that used to be a guest room, sunlight pooled on the walnut desk I'd commissioned from a woodworker in Somerville, who whistled while he measured. My calendar lay open to January, a small square of days that looked innocent. On the bookshelf, the spines of my programming texts sat beside novels I loved enough to carry through 3 moves. In the kitchen, the cast-iron skillet gleamed on its hook, oiled and ready. My mother's question about the storage closet landed in my ear again, and I opened it. The shelves rose neat and square, empty as a stage. I set the pie dish in the sink and rinsed it slow, as if careful water could mend what I couldn't touch. A neighbor's laughter drifted from somewhere down the hall, the kind that comes after a cork pops, and the radiator clicked like a metronome learning a new song. At the window, the city looked honest, no tinsel, no soft focus, just rows of lit squares, and the long dark ribbon of the river. My own reflection stared back a woman with tired eyes and a steady jaw, who suddenly understood the arithmetic of her family. The math was simple. For years, I had made myself easy to lean on the quiet bridge that never complained about weight. Every time Amanda stumbled, I bent. Every time a bill arrived with a story attached, I said I'd see what I could do. Kindness is a good habit until it becomes a rule you never wrote. I could hear my father's voice in that hallway, still patient, still certain. She won't know at first. As if ignorance were a kindness they were extending to me. As if the only wrong here was my future objection. My hand flattened on the window glass until the cold convinced me to move it. In the bedroom, the duvet lay smooth and heavy, a winter cloud measured to fit my body. I sat on the edge and waited for tears that didn't come. Grief is loud in movies, all sobbing and phone calls, but mine arrived like a thick hush. Every sound padded except my own breathing. I thought of the Christmases before this one paper, crowns from cracker boxes, a deck of cards on the table, my mother's hands moving in and out of soapy water, while we talked about ordinary things. I thought of Amanda at 12 standing in my doorway, with hair in her eyes, asking if I would help her with a book report due in the morning. I said yes then, because I thought that's what love required. Tonight, I could not find the version of love they were asking for. The radiator clicked again. Outside, a siren slipped past and dissolved. I lay back and watched the shadow of the ceiling fan like a slow clock. In the next room, my phone vibrated once with a holiday text from a coworker. Something about a board game and a bottle of red, and the ordinary kindness of it struck me harder than it should have. A small life is still a life, I thought. A small room, a steady paycheck, a quiet evening where no one is planning to move into your skin. When the tears finally came, they were not theatrical. They showed up steady, warm, and tired like rain that knows exactly what it's doing. I let them have their way until the ache receded enough to stand. In the bathroom mirror, I looked pale, the kind of white you get from fluorescent lights and too much consideration. I pressed a cold cloth to my eyes and breathed until my shoulders softened. There are moments you think will split you open, and then there are moments that seal you shut. In that mirror, it felt like both. Something long and quiet ended like a song I hadn't realized was still playing in the background. I touched the edge of the sink the way you do when the room tilts, and a single thought rose clear from everything else as clean as winter air. Tomorrow, I would decide what my home meant and who it was for. Outside the window, a strand of lights on a neighboring balcony blinked out, leaving one stubborn bulb still glowing in the dark. I watched it for a long minute, the way you watch a candle just before it learns to be smoke. When I turned off the lamp and slid under the duvet, the room held a different kind of quiet, one that wasn't empty yet. In that quiet, a new shape pressed against the edges of my life, small but certain, waiting for me to name it. And as the heat clicked one more time and settled into a steady hum, I understood that the next sound I would listen for was not my family's voice behind a door, but my own. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay in the stillness of my condo, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan and listening to the radiator click in uneven rhythm. The city outside was quiet, its hum softened by falling snow, but inside, my thoughts moved like restless tides. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their voices again, my father's calm certainty, my mother's steady agreement, Amanda's half-hearted hesitation that sounded more like performance than doubt. By the time the gray light of morning slipped between the curtains, something in me had settled. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a kind of hollow clarity. I couldn't change the years that had shaped us, the habits of giving and taking that had worn grooves into our family, but I could decide what happened next. I brewed coffee, its warmth grounding me, and stood by the window, watching the quiet snow fall onto the city below. Somewhere in that silence, I knew I was done living as their safety net. That morning, I opened my laptop and started searching the local housing market. I didn't fully know what I was looking for, only that I needed to feel the weight of choice again. The listings were a blur of numbers and staged photographs. Kitchens brighter than mine, balconies with better views. But one fact caught my attention. My building's value had risen sharply since I bought my unit. I clicked through comparable sales, running the numbers twice to be sure. The realization was both practical and poetic. The home they plotted to steal had quietly grown in worth. By noon, I was on the phone with Madison Cole, an old college friend turned real estate agent who had helped me when I bought the condo 3 years earlier. She was the kind of woman who always sounded like she knew what came next, no matter how uncertain things were. "I'm thinking about selling," I told her. A pause followed the sound of her keyboard stilling. "You love that place. What's going on?" I told her not every detail at first, just enough that she heard the tremor in my voice. Madison had known my family back when Amanda was already the adored one, and I was the dependable one. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "All right," she said. "Then let's make this easy for you. In your building with your upgrades, I could list by Thursday and have offers by Monday." I felt a flicker of relief, the first in days. Quietly, I added, "No public listing yet. I need to do this without attention." "Understood?" she said. "Send me your schedule. We'll keep it discreet." That afternoon, I walked through my condo with a small notebook, writing down what I wanted to keep and what I was ready to let go of. Each room told a piece of my story: the second-hand desk, where I'd written code through endless nights, the framed photo of the first sunrise from this window, the dishes I'd bought one by one instead of as a set. It wasn't just a home. It was a record of every decision I'd made to stand on my own. But the thought of them in these rooms, Amanda unpacking boxes in my office, my parents rearranging my kitchen, made my chest tighten. Their plan was rooted in the same blindness that had defined our lives. They believed generosity was my default, that I would yield the way I always had. They didn't know how much I had learned to live alone. Over the next few days, I worked methodically. I rented a small storage unit a few blocks away and began packing the items that mattered most. Family photos, letters, the few gifts that had ever felt genuine. The rest, I left untouched, staging the condo to look warm and livable for whoever came next. Madison arranged for a quiet showing with one of her clients, a young couple looking for their first home. She texted updates while I sorted boxes. "They loved the light," one message read. "You'll have an offer soon." At night, I sat by the window with tea cooling in my hands. Outside, the snow had melted into rain that streaked the glass like silver threads. I thought about every moment that had led here, how small choices accumulate until one day you realize you've built a life that doesn't need approval. It wasn't anger that kept me awake anymore. It was the steady hum of possibility. On New Year's Eve, I opened a bottle of champagne I had been saving for a promotion that hadn't happened yet. The cork popped against the quiet, and I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. "This year," I whispered, "is mine." Fireworks bloomed faintly over the city, their light flickering against the clouds. I watched until they faded, then turned off the lamp and let the dark feel clean again. 16 days later, the plan I'd overheard finally came to life. I was at work when my phone buzzed with Amanda's name. Her voice came through soft and practiced, threaded with the kind of tears meant for an audience. She spoke of eviction notices, job losses, and 3 children with nowhere to go. Every line matched what I'd heard in my father's office. I stayed silent until she asked, her voice trembling, "Could we stay with you for a bit, just until we find something else?" I let the pause stretch before answering. "That's a big ask, Amanda. My home office takes up the second bedroom, and it's not set up for kids." She sighed dramatically, then shifted to guilt. "We'd make it work. You wouldn't even notice us, just for a month or 2. An hour later, my mother called. "Sweetheart?" She began, her tone already coated in disappointment. "Family helps family. Remember when we helped you buy books for college? I almost laughed at the comparison." My father's call came next, more direct. Kiddo, your sister's got 3 kids and no roof. You've got space to spare. Don't overthink this. For several days, they persisted guilt in the morning logic, in the afternoon silence at night. Each time I offered hesitation instead of refusal, letting them believe their persuasion was working. When I finally said yes, their relief was so loud I could almost see it. That weekend, they arrived in a rented truck, the sound of the engine echoing in the courtyard. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're doing the right thing." The words felt like an old charm that had lost its magic. Inside, I watched them invade the space I had built with such care. James moved furniture before he'd even taken off his coat. Amanda opened cabinets and announced plans to reorganize. The children ran from room to room, their laughter sharp against my quiet walls. Within minutes, my office chair had been pushed aside, toys spilled across the rug, and my framed photographs leaned awkwardly against the wall. "Your office will make a perfect room for the girls," Amanda said, already rolling up her sleeves. I forced a smile. "And where should I sleep?" An uncomfortable silence followed. My parents exchanged glances, then my mother spoke carefully. "We thought since you're always working, maybe you'd prefer to stay closer to the office during the week. You could get a small studio or stay with friends. Just until they're settled." I nodded slowly, pretending to process the suggestion. "For the short term," I said, "until they find their own place." Relief washed over their faces, and I saw in that moment how little they understood me. They thought I was yielding again, slipping into the role that made their lives easier. They didn't see that I had already packed the pieces of myself I couldn't afford to lose. That night, I left for a short-term corporate apartment arranged by my company. It was a small, furnished space, white walls, thin carpet, the kind of anonymity that keeps you detached. I told my family I was staying with a colleague for convenience, and they believed it. The truth was simpler. I wanted distance to breathe and to watch. From my phone, I checked the small security camera Madison had helped me install before the move. The feed showed my living room, the couch, the bookshelves, the quiet space that used to reflect me. Now it was cluttered with toys and laundry baskets, a second television, and the steady rhythm of other people's voices. I watched my father drop by with takeout, Amanda scroll through her phone while James balanced a baby bottle on the armrest. They looked comfortable, settled, victorious. For a moment, the old ache threatened to return, the one that whispered I'd always be the outsider, even in my own home. But instead, I felt something different, quieter. Freedom. Madison called the next morning. They accepted the offer, she said. $725,000, closing in 3 weeks. I stared out the window at the gray skyline, the weight of the decision pressing in and then lifting all at once. "That's perfect," I said. "Let's finish this." In the days that followed, I moved through work like a person between worlds. During meetings, I nodded at the right times, reviewed lines of code, and made polite small talk. But behind every task, there was a hum of anticipation. My manager mentioned an opening in the Seattle office, a promotion, higher pay, a chance to start over in a city that knew nothing of my family's patterns. I applied that afternoon. Each evening, I returned to my quiet apartment and watched the camera feed again. Once I saw my mother visiting, her face content as she held Lily in the kitchen that used to smell of my morning coffee. Another time, I saw Amanda laughing with James, feet on my table, her head tilted back in the same carefree way she used to laugh when we were kids. That sound used to make me smile. Now it only confirmed how right my choice had been. The night before I signed the final papers, I walked through the city after work. The streets were damp from rain, the air sharp with salt from the harbor. Lights reflected in puddles, and I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who believed peace meant pleasing everyone. I wasn't angry at her anymore. She had done what she knew, but I wasn't her now. When I got back to my apartment, I opened the email from Madison with the final documents attached. I read every line twice, then signed my name where it asked. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen, waiting for confirmation. I pressed send. A slow exhale left my chest, long and certain. The condo, the one they thought they could quietly claim, was no longer mine. It was already becoming something else, a story I'd leave behind. Outside, the rain began again, tapping lightly against the window. I poured a glass of wine and stood there until the city blurred my reflection, merging with the night beyond the glass. Somewhere far away, church bells marked the hour, their sound carrying through the damp air, like a reminder that time keeps moving whether or not we give it permission. I lifted the glass just once in a quiet toast to endings that don't look like victories, and to beginnings that still scare you a little. Then I turned off the lights and let the rain keep its rhythm. 3 weeks passed quietly, the days moving with a rhythm that felt both calm and charged. At work, I smiled through meetings, completed reports, and made small talk about weather and deadlines. No one knew that every night I returned to a borrowed apartment and watched my old life unfold through a screen. The security feed showed the living room of my condo, once warm and minimal, now crowded and loud. Toys on the rug, clothes over the couch, dishes left out. The home I had built was no longer mine, and yet it still carried my shape beneath their noise. Madison called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was between meetings. Her tone carried quiet excitement. "We've got it. The buyers signed and wired the deposit. You'll close in less than 2 weeks." For a moment, I didn't answer. I just stared out the window at the gray city skyline, trying to imagine it without the weight of what came before. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Thank you, Madison, for everything." "You sure you're ready?" she asked gently. "Once it closes, there's no going back. I've never been more ready," I said, and I meant it. That night, I sat at the small kitchen table in my temporary apartment, eating dinner from a paper container while the rain tapped at the window. The camera feed played on my laptop nearby. I watched my family gather in the living room. Amanda curled on the couch, James with his feet on the table. My parents smiling, as if they'd achieved something noble. My mother was talking about paint colors. Amanda laughed, saying she'd start looking for schools nearby. They clinked glasses of my wine, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I just felt done. 2 days later, I received the email from Seattle. The position was mine. Higher salary, relocation bonus, start date in 1 month. The words blurred for a moment before they sank in. I'd spent most of my adult life proving myself first to my family, then to the world, and now without anyone's permission, I was about to start over entirely. I called Madison to share the news. She laughed, that bright, open laugh that always made me feel lighter. "New job, new city, new life," she said. "Looks like this story's about to have a good ending." "Not yet," I replied softly. "There's still one last scene left." We scheduled the closing for the following Friday. Between now and then, my task was simple: say nothing and let the illusion stand. The days leading up to that dinner were strangely calm. My family texted occasionally, mostly logistical things about utilities, small questions about the building requests for appliance manuals. Each message arrived with the assumption that this space, my space, was now theirs. I answered politely, neutrally, giving them nothing to question. On Friday, I left work early and stopped by the market on my way to the condo. I picked up ingredients for dinner: fresh pasta, tomatoes, basil, a bottle of champagne. The bag felt heavier than it should have, the way small rituals often do when you know they're the last of something. When I reached the building, the concierge nodded politely, unaware of the quiet war that had played out behind those walls. My keycard still worked. I took the elevator up, the familiar chime echoing through the narrow space, and stepped into what used to be my home. Amanda opened the door with an air of casual ownership. "Hey." "You're early," she said, shifting the baby on her hip. "We were just about to start dinner." The living room looked nothing like I remembered. The soft rug was gone, replaced by a bright foam mat. The walls held new family photos, smiling faces, none of which were mine. Toys were piled in corners, a stray shoe under the table, a half-finished art project spread across the counter. I walked through it all quietly, setting the grocery bag on the kitchen island. My parents arrived a few minutes later, carrying dessert and wine. My father clapped James on the back like a business partner. My mother kissed the top of Amanda's head, proud and satisfied. Watching them, I realized they had convinced themselves this was how it was always meant to be. My success was a resource, not a story. We sat down to eat around the table I had once saved months to buy. The wood grain still gleamed under the light. But the room felt smaller now, crowded with a kind of noisy gratitude that didn't include me. I ate slowly, listening to their easy chatter plans for the girls' school ideas, for repainting the master bedroom jokes about how well family cooperation had worked out. When my father suggested transferring the utilities into Amanda's name for convenience, something in me shifted. The words didn't sting anymore. They simply marked the end of a long misunderstanding. I stood, gathered the empty plates, and walked into the kitchen to rinse them. The water ran steady, its sound covering the faint thud of my heartbeat. I looked at my reflection in the window, the same calm expression, the same steady eyes, and understood that they would never recognize the difference between kindness and permission. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and returned to the table carrying the bottle of champagne. "I think we should celebrate," I said, setting down 5 glasses. Amanda smiled, misreading the tone. "Finally. For once, you brought something fun." I poured the bubbles, rising fast and bright. "To change," I said, "and new beginnings." The glasses clinked. For a moment, we were silent, the air thick with the faint scent of citrus and cork. Then I reached into my bag and placed a large envelope on the table. "What's that?" my father asked, his fork halfway to his mouth. I sat back in my chair. "The closing documents," I said evenly. "The condo was sold this morning." The room went still. Amanda blinked first, confusion flickering across her face. "You... what?" she asked softly, then louder. "You can't do that. We live here. I can..." I said, and my voice didn't waver. "It's my name on the deed. It always was." James leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You told us we could stay." "I told you it was temporary," I replied. "And I overheard your plans to make it permanent." My mother's hand trembled around her glass. "You were eavesdropping." I almost smiled at that. I was walking down a hallway in my childhood home, listening to my family plan how to take mine. Amanda's eyes filled quickly, her voice breaking into practiced tears. "Where are we supposed to go?" "The kids, you have 10 days, I said gently. "That's the same amount of time you gave me to move out of my own home." My father's face reddened, his voice rising. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I met his gaze calmly. "You've mistaken compliance for gratitude, Dad. This isn't repayment, it's closure." The silence that followed stretched until the only sound was the faint hiss of the radiator. My mother reached out as if to touch my hand, but I drew it back before she could. "I'm moving to Seattle," I said quietly. "I start my new position next month. I wish you all the best, but this chapter is finished." Amanda shook her head, her tears turning to anger. "You can't just walk away from us. We're family." I stood, slipping my coat from the back of the chair. "Family doesn't take without asking. Family respects boundaries." As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. "You'll regret this." I paused long enough to turn back. I already spent 30 years regretting everything I gave away to keep your peace. I'm done with that. Then I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The air outside felt colder than I remembered, sharp and clean. The elevator arrived with a quiet chime, and as the doors closed, I saw the reflection of the dining room behind me, the lights still glowing faces, frozen in disbelief. By the time I reached the lobby, the building was silent. I walked past the front desk, past the polished floor that had once reflected my first night of freedom, and stepped into the crisp night. Snow was falling again, slow and soundless. I tilted my face toward it, letting a few flakes melt against my skin. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, relief maybe, or the sudden weightlessness that comes when a long burden is finally set down. In the distance, car lights moved along the main road, tracing lines of brightness through the dark. I thought of the girl who once believed peace was earned through endless giving. She had tried her best, but tonight she was finally allowed to rest. I crossed the street and kept walking until the building disappeared behind me. Each step felt clearer than the last, leading towards something unknown, but mine alone. The snow thickened and the city lights softened into gold through the haze. I didn't look back. The night air followed me into the apartment lobby, cool and sharp against my skin. My pulse still thudded in my ears, but beneath the adrenaline, there was something steadier and unexpected calm. I crossed the marble floor, nodding to the concierge on my way out, and by the time I reached Madison's car, idling at the curb, my hands had stopped shaking. She didn't say a word as I slid into the passenger seat. She just handed me a folded napkin and a cup of hot tea she'd picked up on the way. The faint citrus scent filled the space between us. I took a slow sip, and only then did she ask, "Did you do it?" I nodded. "They know everything." Madison exhaled softly, eyes still on the road. "And how did it feel? Like breathing after holding it for 30 years?" I said. The words surprised me with their honesty. Back at her apartment, she set out a blanket and poured 2 small glasses of wine. We didn't talk much. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant rhythm of rain on the balcony were enough. I slept that night without dreams, and when morning came, I woke to sunlight filtering through her kitchen blinds. It was the first peaceful morning I could remember in months. That peace didn't last long. By the time I checked my phone, it was overflowing missed calls, voicemails, and text messages stacked like an avalanche. 55 calls, 37 texts, all from my family. The screen looked almost absurd, as if numbers could measure desperation. I set the phone face down and poured myself coffee. Madison joined me a few minutes later, hair pulled back, calm as ever. She saw the screen light up again and shook her head. "They'll say anything right now," she said quietly. "You don't have to answer." I know I said, though, part of me still hesitated. The habit of responding ran deep, but as the morning light spread across the table, I realized I didn't owe them an audience. I turned the phone off. The hours that followed felt like clearing a field after a storm. I made lists, packing closing paperwork, travel dates. Madison helped me sort what I'd need for Seattle and what could wait in storage. Every small task steadied me. Every checkmark on the page felt like reclaiming space. When I finally turned the phone back on that evening, the messages had shifted from anger to pleading. My mother's voice filled the first voicemail. She cried softly, describing how upset everyone was, how confused the children were. "We never meant to hurt you, honey," she said between breaths. "We just thought you could help until things got better." The next message was from Amanda. Her tone trembled on purpose, carefully performed. "The kids are asking why they can't stay in their home," she said. "They think you don't love them anymore." I listened without replying, deleting each message after it played. There was no apology in any of them, only grief that the plan hadn't worked. By Monday morning, I was back at work, burying myself in code and deadlines. My supervisor, Allison, knew about my transfer to Seattle and was kind enough to shield me from questions. During lunch, my phone buzzed with a call from the building concierge. His voice was polite but uneasy. "Miss Lewis, your parents are here. They're asking to see you." My stomach sank. "Tell them I'm in meetings all day," I said quietly. "And please make sure they can't access my floor." He hesitated, then said, "Understood." That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to finalize the closing documents. He was an older man named Richard Hayes, calm and precise in the way only lifelong professionals are. He read everything twice before handing me the pen. "Your family can threaten all they like," he said, sliding the last page forward. "But they have no claim here. You've handled this properly." I signed where he pointed. The pen moved smoothly, the ink drying almost instantly. For a long moment, I just stared at my signature. It looked ordinary, just a name on paper, but I knew what it meant. The next day, the harassment changed shape. Amanda posted a long message online describing a betrayal within the family, hinting at homelessness and cruelty without naming me. Mutual acquaintances began reaching out their messages, careful and half-believing. I answered only the few who mattered, explaining simply that there had been a misunderstanding about a temporary stay. No anger, no defense, just the truth in small doses. Madison read the post later that evening and frowned. "You could clear this up publicly," she said. "I don't need to," I replied. "The truth will wait." And it did. 2 days later, my parents showed up at my office building again, this time insisting it was a family emergency. Security called before letting them in. I thanked the guard, then asked that they be turned away politely but firmly. My father left a voicemail afterward, his voice thick with fury. "You think this makes you strong, Ivonne? All you're doing is breaking the family apart." That night, I sat by Madison's window and listened to the city. Somewhere below, a bus sighed at the curb doors, hissing open and closed. I realized I wasn't breaking anything. I was simply refusing to keep it from collapsing. The week of the closing arrived quietly. I met Madison at the title office on Friday morning. The young couple buying my condo looked nervous and hopeful, their hands intertwined on the table. As I signed the final transfer, the husband smiled and said, "It's a beautiful place. We'll take good care of it." I believed him. Afterward, Madison and I walked to a cafe nearby. The snow had melted into a thin drizzle, and people hurried past with umbrellas and coffee cups. I sat by the window, with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the city move. "It's done," Madison said gently. "It's done," I repeated. The words felt lighter than I expected. That evening, I opened my email and found one new message. The subject line read, "Where will you stay?" It was from my mother. Inside, her tone was subdued. She wrote that they had accepted the situation, that Amanda and the children would move back in with them temporarily. "We don't agree with your choices," she wrote, "but we hope you'll come by to say goodbye to the kids before you leave." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. Sunday afternoon, I drove out to my parents' house. The sky was overcast, and the trees along the street were bare, their branches dark against the pale light. When I pulled into the driveway, a moving truck sat parked by the curb. The sight made my chest tighten. My father opened the door before I could knock. His expression was unreadable, the kind of calm that hides resentment. "Come in," he said shortly. The living room was crowded with boxes and half-packed bags. The children were watching cartoons, quiet and subdued. Zoe noticed me first. Her face brightened for a moment before she asked, "Are you still mad at us, Aunt Ivonne?" I knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. Grown-ups just have things to work out sometimes. It's not about you." Amanda entered from the kitchen, Lily balanced on her hip. Her eyes were red, her tone flat. "Mom said you might stop by." "I wanted to say goodbye," I said softly. "I'm moving next week." James leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed. "Seattle, right? Convenient timing." I met his gaze without flinching. Life has a way of opening doors when you stop waiting for permission. My mother appeared then, carrying folded towels, pretending to be busy. "The guest room's ready for everyone," she said to Amanda, ignoring me entirely. The dismissal was deliberate, the same cold shoulder she'd used for years to control the temperature of a room. Once it would have worked, I stayed for 20 minutes, long enough to read the girls a story and hand Zoe a small journal I'd bought for her trip, its cover embossed with silver stars. "Write down everything that makes you curious," I told her. "It helps you remember who you are." When I stood to leave, my father followed me to the door. "Your mother's heartbroken," he said quietly. "We never thought you'd choose money over family." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "It wasn't money I chose, Dad. It was self-respect." "There's a difference." He shook his head, unwilling or unable to understand. "We raised you better than this." I turned to face him fully. "Maybe, but maybe you should have raised us all to respect each other, not just the loudest one." I left before he could answer. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt final. In the car, I sat for a long moment, the silence wrapping around me. I didn't cry. I just breathed slow and deep, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. Outside, the afternoon light had softened into gold, touching the edges of the street with quiet grace. When I started the engine, the radio came on low, an old song about leaving home and finding peace. I let it play as I drove away mile by mile until the house disappeared in the rearview mirror. The road back to the city felt different this time. Not lighter exactly, but clear. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving towards something. The life ahead was uncertain, but for the first time it was mine alone. By the time I reached Madison's apartment, the streetlights were flickering on. She met me at the door, taking one look at my face before nodding quietly. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. We shared dinner in easy silence, two friends in a kitchen filled with ordinary warmth. Later, as I packed the last box for Seattle, I looked out at the skyline, dark buildings outlined against the faint glow of the harbor. The city that had witnessed my struggle was fading into night. Tomorrow, I would start again, somewhere new. And for the first time, that thought didn't scare me. It felt like standing at the edge of something wide and open, waiting to be built. The morning I left Boston, the sky hung low with silver clouds. The air smelled faintly of salt and wet pavement, the kind of weather that made the city quieter than usual. Madison helped me carry my last box to the car, her scarf trailing in the breeze. She hugged me once, tight and wordless, before stepping back with that steady smile of hers. "Seattle's going to fit you," she said. "You'll see." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The street was empty except for the hum of a passing bus. I looked up at my building one last time, the windows where I'd once watched the city fall asleep. Then I turned away and didn't look back. The flight west took 6 hours, but it felt longer. Clouds drifted past the window like quiet ghosts. Somewhere over the Midwest, I realized I hadn't cried once. Grief had already done its work. What was left now was space room to build something new. Seattle greeted me with soft rain, a gray drizzle that blurred the skyline into watercolor. The corporate apartment my company arranged was small but bright, its windows overlooking the Puget Sound. I unpacked the first night, slowly laying each object in its new place. A lamp, a few books, the framed photograph of a sunrise I'd taken years ago. When I was done, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and watched the mist drift over the water. It was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No voices in the hall, no family calling from the next room, no expectations waiting to be met. For the first time in my adult life, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The weeks that followed unfolded gently. My new job was challenging in all the right ways, demanding focus, but rewarding precision. The people in the Seattle office were kind, curious, without being intrusive, supportive without the weight of obligation. They invited me to join them for Friday dinners, weekend hikes, book clubs. At first, I declined, unsure how to exist without boundaries that needed defending. But gradually, I said yes. Friendships began to form in quiet ways, shared coffee breaks, small jokes, long walks after work. My circle grew wider, and with it, a new sense of belonging emerged, one not rooted in blood or guilt, but in choice. 2 months after arriving, I signed the lease on a small apartment overlooking the bay. It had a narrow balcony and creaky floors, but when the afternoon light poured through the windows, the whole space glowed like honey. I painted the walls a pale blue, hung sheer curtains, and filled the shelves with plants. Each evening, I'd open the windows and let the sea breeze carry the scent of rain inside. Little by little, I built a rhythm. Mornings began with coffee and quiet music. Evenings ended with reading by lamplight. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. Sometimes I wrote about the past, but mostly I wrote about what peace sounded like: the hum of the ferry in the distance, the way raindrops tapped against the railing, the soft click of my keyboard in an empty room. One gray afternoon in March, an email arrived from Amanda. The subject line was simple: "We're doing better." She wrote that she and James had found a small rental house in a nearby town. He'd started working for a construction firm, and she was helping at the local elementary school. "The kids are happy," she wrote. "We've had to learn to manage on our own. It's been hard but good in a way I didn't expect." I read it twice, my heart steady. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it didn't need to be. Growth sometimes speaks quietly without admitting the damage. I replied the next morning, congratulating her, asking about the children. Her answer came back quickly, full of photos of Zoe's art project, Sophie's toothless grin, and baby Lily learning to walk. The exchange opened a small doorway between us, nothing dramatic, just enough light to pass through. Over the following months, messages arrived now and then. A holiday photo, a birthday wish. No apologies, but no manipulation either. I learned to appreciate them for what they were: signs of progress, not repair. My parents stayed silent at first. Then on my mother's birthday in May, I called. The conversation was careful, full of pauses and polite questions. She asked about the weather, the new apartment, the city. I asked about the garden, the girls. It was surface talk, but there was gentleness in it. By the time we said goodbye, she sounded almost relieved. After the call, I sat by the window as the sunset spilled over the water in streaks of gold and lavender. The reflection rippled against the glass, and I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting. Sometimes it just meant letting the past stop dictating the present. By summer, the world had softened around me. I joined a weekend photography group that met at the Pike Place Market on Saturdays. We wandered through the stalls, capturing color and motion flowers spilling from buckets, fishmongers tossing silver arcs through the air, raincoats flashing yellow against the gray. The first time I showed my work, at a small gallery downtown Madison, sent flowers with a note that said simply, "You made it, friend." Her faith had carried me farther than she knew. Every so often, I still thought about Boston, the narrow streets after snow, the echo of my footsteps in the old building hallway. But the memories no longer ached. They felt distant, like chapters from someone else's story pages already read and folded closed. In August, Zoe called through video chat. Her face filled the screen, hair pulled into a messy ponytail. Aunt Ivonne, guess what she said proudly? I got an A on my science project about plants. I laughed, warmth blooming in my chest. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. She grinned and turned the tablet to show her mother. Amanda waved from across the room. Hi, Ivonne. Seattle looks good on you, she said softly. I smiled back. You look good too. She hesitated, then added, We're still figuring things out, but I get it now. About what you did, I really do. The screen flickered slightly, as if the moment needed to breathe. I nodded, my throat tightening just enough to feel it. That's all I ever wanted, Amanda, for you to understand. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at the darkened screen. Outside, a light rain began to fall, each drop tracing slow paths down the window pane. I opened the balcony door and stepped outside. The city below shimmered under streetlights, reflections dancing on wet pavement. The rain was cool against my face, but it felt cleansing. I thought of the girl I'd been, the one who believed love meant endurance, that peace had to be earned through endless giving. She'd done her best, but the woman standing here now knew better. Peace wasn't given. It was chosen again and again, sometimes in silence, sometimes in solitude. That night, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and curled up by the window, watching the fairy lights drift across the bay. The rhythm of the water reminded me that life kept moving forward, unhurried and steady. The ache that had once lived in my chest had turned into something quieter, gratitude perhaps, or simply understanding. I wrote in my journal before bed. Just one line this time. I finally feel like my own home. When I closed the notebook, the city had gone still. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the moon cast a soft glow across the sound. And for a moment, the reflection looked like a path leading straight to tomorrow. If this story touched something in you, tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, remember this: the choice might ache at first, but it's how freedom begins. Thank you for listening. Sometimes the most beautiful endings are the ones we build ourselves, one quiet, honest day at a time.